it seems like your book, by the way, if you haven't picked up his book, Beyond the Prototype, it's available now, right?
Yep,
Amazon.com. I just finished reading it. When I read this, having read Jake's book, it seemed like this should be like a 2-volume set. That Jake's was like teeing up the idea of a design sprint, and this was, okay, now that you've done one, now what? Is that a fair description of your book?
Yeah, that's how it happened. And in fact, when the events that Jake and I do, the attendees get both books.
Uh-huh.
We feel that it's very important to think about not only the process, but what happens afterwards.
Right.
And I wrote this very much informed from the perspective of my clients that had run design sprints, as well as other folks that I've found in the industry and in the space who have run design sprints or even hackathons or any kind of ideation process.
Right.
And then 6 months later, haven't done anything about it.
Yeah.
And I talk about like the Post-it notes are on the wall mocking you, or falling off slowly like
curling.
snowflakes. Yeah.
Right.
And so, and essentially, it's how do we move from now to next? Because the now is, the game of whack-a-mole or just like the treadmill that we're on. It's really hard to break out of it. It's really hard to kind of step back and look around and go, how do we reinvent ourselves? And especially in a complex adaptive system that we find ourselves in, it's super important to constantly be thinking about that and making sure that we don't get left in the dust.
So one last question. Back to those of us who build hardware, not just software.
Sure.
What's your counsel to guys like us? Because whether design sprint, agile, you name it, there's thousands of examples of pure play software companies doing great things with agile and sprint, and it makes guys like us jealous, right? But laying out a PCB, machining metal, designing things has some attenuation in it that software doesn't, which is you just can't respin a PCB in a day. Mm-hmm. But I can recompile code in a few minutes. For those of us that are doing hardware, when you look kind of forward, are there certain either technologies or approaches or concepts that we haven't been thinking about that maybe we need to keep our eyes on that will help us have more acceleration through our design cycle and allow us to do that iterative work better in the future than what we realized we could do behind us? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think the most powerful thing is just the mindset. If you have the mindset and you're always kind of stepping back and saying, how can I prototype this?
Yes.
And specifically thinking about prototypes from the perspective of, I like to think about this definition in two parts. It's either simulating the future, mm-hmm. or it's answering some question. And so if we identify a question or assumption we have, and ideally you're designing your human interactions, the meetings, the way you do things, so that you accommodate for identifying your assumptions early. Because
right.
I talked about those assumptions that we think of, that the world is flat, we think
yeah.
it's the truth. Like, man, if we can surface those earlier, then, that's huge. And so let's design a process, a system that works for us, that helps mm-hmm. us find those things. Once we find them, how can we test it?
Right.
And we can build a prototype around that, just that one thing. Because I think a lot of times people hear prototype and they think it's a proof of concept, or I had to build a whole PCB. Maybe you just need to, test one little thing. Maybe it's something you can do on a breadboard.
Right.
Or, one of my favorite stories of a hardware prototype was Google Glass. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
If anyone remembers that.
Yeah, a little screen on the kick. Yeah.
And so they had, I think it was like a 90-minute meeting planned to kind of kick off the project. They had already decided they were doing it, but it was more like the design kickoff. They were
right.
really starting to make some hard decisions, and they were going to go off and build this thing. And 45 minutes into the meeting, they kind of hit a brick wall because they were trying to figure out what color to make the heads-up display.
Yeah.
And they got into all these scientific arguments around, well, this photon is like stronger than this photon, and how is it going to impact the eye? Is
yep.
it going to be, or blah, blah, blah. And they talked for another 45 minutes trying to solve this one question. And at the end of the meeting, clearly time had run out, and Sergey stood up and said, look, I think it was red is the lowest energy photon. It's going to be the less strain on the eye. Let's do that. Done. Move forward. there's one guy on the team who just didn't sit well with him, how they made that decision. I mean, and his point is, I love this, smart people make smart reasons for their guesses.
That's okay. Smart people make smart reasons for their guesses.
Yep.
Okay.
And so Sergey had made a smart reason for his guess as to
Right.
why that should be the heads-up display. So he went back to his desk, kind of brooded on it for a bit, and said,
This is confirmation bias is basically what it is.
Exactly.
Right.
This can't stand. And so he went and got a coat hanger and like rigged up this like Google Glass thing in an afternoon where like he was seeing red on this, like it was actually using I think a screen protector for a cell phone, and then that's what he was projecting the text onto. Turns out red is the worst, lowest energy, hardest to see.
Right.
You had to squint. It's very straining on the eye. They ended up, by actually demonstrating the different colors, they could pick the one that was best. So after he made the prototype, he shared it with everyone in the room, and it was very consistent on which direction they should go in. And he built that prototype in less than 45 minutes.
Interesting. So there's a couple of things in there, right? Number one is if I go back to it, it's first of all, we need to identify honestly where the risk is. Secondly, question how we arrived at that question.
Yep.
Right? Everything's on the board. And the third, which is probably, shall we say, takes more huevos rancheros than others, is having a culture where you can second guess Sergey.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a cultural hill a lot of companies won't climb.
Yes, and I think that gets into something I'm very passionate about, which is psychological safety.
Okay.
So the extreme of what you just said is you've got the kind of like cult of personality, the leader, no one can...
Elon Musk.
Like do what they say.
Right.
Even if you don't have that, even if there's the leader who's like, okay, yeah, like anything goes, let's experiment, let's see this, there can be a lack of psychological safety. And what that means is in the meeting, are people confident that they can speak their mind?
Right.
Is there a junior engineer in that room that feels like, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this, or I have an idea, but I'm pretty sure it's going to get shot down because everyone just shoots me down.
Right.
And if that's the case, in any micro sense of the concept, it's very, very bad.
Right.
And it has to be confronted very intentionally. And if you think about designing your meetings and how people come together and create that safety, wow, because then you're tapping into the true diversity. And diversity of thought is so powerful. I don't know if you've seen any of the research on this, but companies that hire for diversity make like 20x the productivity than other companies. And it's not just about, I mean, it's super important to be applying things like the Rooney Rule and thinking about how we give opportunity.
What is that?
Oh, sorry. The Rooney Rule means that for every open opportunity you have, that you interview 2 people from an underrepresented class.
Okay.
So if we're a bunch of white guys, then we should be interviewing a woman. We should be finding people of color. It doesn't say you have to hire that person. It just means that you're making the effort. So that, because a lot of times what the excuse people will make is say, well, it's a sourcing problem. You know, we don't have enough talent. Well, it's like, well, how many did you interview? None. It's like, well, so it's just basically making an effort. I believe it was a sports coach, Rooney.
Rooney, he's a team owner.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh or something, I think. Yeah. Okay.
And so it's not just about applying that, because that's important. That's how we think about the diversity of our people. But we also want to have diversity of ideas. I think it was Patton that said, if we're all thinking the same, no one's thinking.
Right.
And so if you're ever in a room where there's just tons of agreement, you might want to hit the pause button and say, all right, who's not speaking their mind? Because there should be some nuance.
Interesting. There's a lot as a leader of a company to sit there and look in the mirror and go, is that my culture?
Absolutely.
Right? That's a healthy discussion to have.
Yeah.
So last counsel for those people who are, let's say they're ready to step off to be an entrepreneur, and they got a tech idea, software, hardware, whatnot. What would your counsel be to them as far as to set their culture correct
Wow.
to be able to accelerate and be competitive, to make the culture of how they develop whatever their idea is part of the core IP of their brand and their enterprise?
That's a fantastic question. You know, a lot of stuff flooded to mind, but the thing that kept coming back, and it almost seems trite, but it's super important, is just creativity and curiosity. If you build a culture of curiosity and I would say playful curiosity,
Right.
because the child's mind is so powerful, and you know, whether it's like the fact that we have been taught not to doodle because
Right.
doodling is like a bad thing, or like or we've been taught that accuracy and correctness is so rewarded, whereas like tapping into that 5-year-old mind can be so liberating and so powerful. And so and that's easy to do from the beginning, but a lot of times it's more difficult to do in companies that have been more established, because
Right.
it's like, oh no,
There's a
we can't-
well-worn process.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so my advice for folks in that situation is maybe decouple it, right? Like say, this is a moment where we're going to do some exploration. So turn off the naysayer, turn off the, like, this is how things work mindset, and let's just like go explore some things together. Because I think that's where the real solutions start to like just manifest,
Right.
when we're starting to really play in uncharted territory and getting uncomfortable. And I would just say, you know, again, coming back, the psychological safety and trust, super important. And if you establish that from the beginning, and that everyone has a voice, you will find that you tap into the room intelligence,
Right.
and this notion that not everybody's as smart as everybody.
Douglas, this is great stuff. Thanks for coming to AE Squared. Man, we're going to follow up with you. Can we get a hand for Douglas? You can pick up Douglas's book at Amazon. We'll put links to both Voltage Control, where Douglas is going to be if you want to attend one of his conferences, how you can pick up his book, and everything you've got to share. We look forward to telling your story loud and proud.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming to AE Squared.
Good to see you.
AE Squared is a Hiller Town Hall production. Copyright 2019. AE Squared is produced by Marlena Falk. Video by Anthony Longoria. And audio by Mark Skura. Music by Brian Patterson. Want tickets to a future taping? Well, stop on by at hillermej.com/town hall. Hey, thanks for watching this episode. Make sure to join us next time. We're bringing in Doug Sayer. He's the founder and chief business officer at Premier Technology. Huge metalworking operation up in Idaho, doing some fantastic work in the nuclear, aerospace and defense, food services business. You name it, Doug's done it. You're going to want to check out how he did it right here on AE Squared.